I'm going to be talking about some of the work that we're doing in the North Saskatchewan River Basin. So you all know who we are. I don't think there's I'm not sure if there's any guests in the room that don't know who the organization is, but we're Freshwater Conservation Canada. We used to be Trout Unlimited Canada, as you all know. Um, so yeah, we're national registered charity. We have professional staff in Calgary, where I work, and Guelph, where my other rest of my team works, and a broad base of members like you all, and supporters and partners across the country. Our priorities that really drive our work are around water quality and quantity, aquatic communities and their habitats, and the name change really better reflects those things and more broadly represents the kind of work that we do. So tonight I'm going to be talking about the North Saskatchewan River Basin and the work that we're doing. And the North Saskatchewan River has a special place in my heart because it's where I grew up in Saskatchewan. This picture is taken from near my parents' farm on the North Saskatchewan River, between the Wingard, near the Wingard Ferry, if anyone knows where that is, upstream of Prince Albert, downstream of Fort Carlton. So it's a pretty special place for me, and it's a privilege for me to be able to work along the North Saskatchewan River in Alberta. So we'll talk about a little bit about what we're doing in the headwaters, in particularly Fall Creek, Radiant Creek, and Elk Creek, where we have active projects, and then a little bit about what we're doing in Edmonton. So people always ask me, how are the fish doing? And honestly, not great. This may come off a little bit depressing, but bear with me. It's not all doom and gloom. Freshwater fishes are declining at a rate much faster than their marine and terrestrial counterparts. This is a signal that there's some things going on with the watersheds and with the freshwater ecosystems that support those fish. They're really just a product of the landscape that they live on, and they can't move around that much, really. They're just kind of stuck in those rivers and lakes. So this is an indication that there's some, health issues with the watersheds. And it's not just about the fish. The communities that rely on healthy freshwater ecosystems also don't get to reap the full benefit of those ecosystem services that healthy systems provide. So flood and drought attenuation, recreation, harvest opportunity, water security, all the things that we depend on healthy freshwater ecosystems for. So we should be thankful that these fish are telling us, waving this flag and saying, hey, help us, because if we help the fish, we're helping ourselves, essentially. And I can illustrate that a little bit through the bull trout, which is the native salmonid found, well, one of the native salmonids. There's also mountain whitefish. So bull trout are found along the eastern slopes in Alberta, including in the North Sask. There are provincial fish, and this map, which maybe you've all seen before, but I think it's just a great tool for illustrating what's going on. This is from the provincial government's Fish Sustainability Index, and it's a kind of report card in terms of this one showing historic adult density of bull trout. So this is kind of like, think of pre-settlement, that they were able to collect this data through old reports and diary entries and photographs and historic records. So, widely distributed, but not like, there's some variation among different watersheds. The situation today looks a lot less good. We've seen declines in their range and in their abundance throughout the eastern slopes. And if you think about bull trout having evolved on this landscape for 13,000 years, give or take, really these declines have occurred in the last 100 or so, give or take. So there's a lot of stuff that we've introduced onto the landscape that have decreases bull trout, and everything else that depends on those systems, their ability to adapt to change and their resilience to disturbance and things like drought and other disturbances. So we have natural limitations, which there's not a lot we can do about. But we've introduced changes to water quality and water flow. We have hybridization and competition with non-native species. We've built roads and dams across rivers that block fish movement. Um, we have pollution and water quality issues from sediment runoff. We have historic overfishing and um, um, all of these threats interact with each other and act cumulatively against the bull trout. So a lot of the work that we're doing, we have been doing a lot of work over the last few years, even though we're not all about trout. Um, the trout, the pull for native trout work is strong. Has been funding available for doing work on native trout, a lot of interest, and we've really capitalized on that over the last few years through the Native Trout Collaborative with other partner organizations. And it's been really positive. I think a lot of, these groups working together, each bringing something a little bit different to the table and working together on recovery efforts. So one place that we have been working, we actually started working here quite a few years ago, and we're back, is Fall Creek. So Fall Creek is in the upper North Saskatchewan. Fall Creek is a tributary of the Ram River. So it's here on this map. Um, and you can see where it is in relation to Rocky Mountain House and other places that you all might hang out and go fishing and things like that. Lots of work has been done on Fall Creek over the years. ACA has been active there for like 25 years, monitoring the fish use and, pardon me, what's going on in Fall Creek. In particular, a lot of spawning surveys. And so they have this really great data set of red surveys that they've done since around 2007. And it's pretty well understood, I think, now the importance and significance of Fall Creek in terms of the overall Ram River population and the North Saskatchewan River population of bull trout. So it's a critical place for bull trout to spawn. They move into Lower Fall Creek and spawn there, and then and move along. So it's a little rearing, spawning and rearing place for bull trout that's super important. In 2017, some of you may remember the Streamwatch program. And the Streamwatch program did an assessment of the Fall Creek watershed, documenting impacts from off-highway vehicle use, and it was a lot. And this is a picture, I think, actually from that report, and it shows, a trail that has captured, or sorry, trail that has captured the creek. And this is like a classic off-highway vehicle trail interaction with a stream in the eastern slopes where they become the creek in some cases, and it's unfortunate. But the unmanaged OHV use can be certainly problematic. So in 2018, we worked with the provincial government, with Alberta Environment and Parks at the time, to complete an intensive reclamation project. So we reclaimed 54 crossings over 9 kilometers of Fall Creek, and it was a pretty intensive project, and took a few weeks actually, and a lot more planning. And since then, there were some attempts by some recreational OHV users to try and get back in there. We had to do a little bit of maintenance work and some access control. So I think things have kind of leveled out. There is still some livestock impacts along Fall Creek, but the off-highway vehicle use has been much reduced. And it's a lot better than it used to be. And I think there's been some positive indications from from fisheries surveys that they have responded positively. So that's good news as far as I'm concerned. So the next phase of our Fall Creek restoration project, um, we're do we're going to do a little bit more habitat restoration work in the upper watershed. We're also looking at a conservation stocking program, which will involve translocating juvenile bull trout and also some in-stream incubation chambers in Upper Fall Creek to essentially expand the range of bull trout upstream of a set of waterfalls that you see here that are impassable. So this map shows the watershed, and there's a black dot where there's the waterfall that is so named after, or Fall Creek so named after. So the area that bull trout are spawning is below that waterfall, and cutthroat trout have been stocked above the waterfall years ago. They're not native in this watershed, but they have become established, and they're a reproducing population of cutthroat trout. So we do know that it supports salmonid fish, and there is some, salmonid spawning habitat. And so we're looking at this as an opportunity to bolster the population of bull trout in Fall Creek, and it sort of, I guess, essentially expand their range. This is kind of a unique project that we're doing, and we're working with a bunch of different partners. So Alberta Environment and Protected Areas is taking the lead in terms of overall coordination. Forestry and Parks is involved because the hatcheries are now under that ministry. And so we have the hatchery folks involved in the program. ACA is involved, DFO, we are, FRI Research and U of C are incorporating a research project into this program, and West Fraser is also supporting just through advice, but also funding through the FRIP program, which is the Forest Resource Improvement Program. So we started doing this in about 2024, I think, is when we secured funding from the federal government's Environmental Damages Fund. And that grant is available after fines have been levied to various, proponents or companies for various, environmental infractions. And they have this grant program available for restoration work. And so we applied and were successful for this project from the EDF program. So we formed this working group of all those partners. We had a habitat restoration feasibility study completed. And then in 2025, last year, we really focused a lot on the planning, understanding the genetics, the habitat. We did some stream temperature monitoring, population survey, just to help inform the next activities. And then in 2026, Sam Chevalier, he's working with FRI and U of C. He's going to be doing his Master of Science project on this to evaluate the different conservation stocking techniques. And we'll be starting on the habitat rehab, and then we'll continue this project for the next couple of years after that. So it's an intensive effort, but we're excited about it. This is some imagery from the Upper Fall Creek that shows some of the trails that are there, and some of the problems with these trails. That, they start with these like little rills in the trail sometimes, and they can become these huge gullies, and all of this material from the trail erodes down and ends up in the creek ultimately. And so that's why these can be a problem for fish habitat. So those are some of the things that we're going to be addressing over the next couple years. Radiant Creek. So we've been doing work on Radiant Creek for quite a few years as well. Radiant Creek is also in the Forest Reserve. It's right along the Forestry Trunk Road right here. So just sort of situated along the Trunk Road west of Caroline in the Clearwater River Valley. Beautiful place. This is what Radiant Creek looks like, where in our initial project site here, just on the south side of the trunk road. And this is a map showing where the, former creek alignment, you can see this meandering pattern. At some point, there was likely a flood or some high water event that caused high velocity flow to, blast through the crossing under the trunk road. And it ended up cutting a new path in the creek, shortening the creek significantly into this sort of much straighter, really featureless system like this. Um, there's always more to the story. There's more going on there. There's a shrub encroachment issue that's well documented. This paper from 2009, I think, documents how shrubs like bog birch and some willows are encroaching on this grassland kind of meadow. And likely this area maybe experienced fires, and it doesn't now. And so we have the shrub encroachment issue, which is causing other potential land use conflict. And ultimately, it reduces the available forage for livestock and wildlife, and also feral horses that are pretty prolific in this area. And so, because they are losing all this forage, they end up hanging out and just loafing around the creek a lot more. And that causes damage to the stream banks and the creeks themselves. So how we're addressing some of those issues, we're using techniques called low-tech process-based restoration. And the stream is, we would consider structurally starved. It's like boring. There's nothing going on in there. So we're adding wood to create a little bit more chaos and complexity in the stream to create pools and riffles and point bars and meanders and things like that. This is just a diagram that shows the process, sort of how that works. So we started doing this in 2021, and we installed 12 structures downstream of the trunk road. And these are just woody accumulations. We were able to get all this wood from Sundry Forest Products, just from their cut blocks. And then the wood is pinned in place with these untreated posts just to hold everything in place. So everything is all natural materials. There's no cables or anchors or anything like that. And they're meant to sort of move and interact with the river, and for the river to sort of change a little bit along with it. And you'll see also in the background of the imagery, there's also a fence. So we fenced this area off, this treatment area, while we're doing this project to exclude cattle and feral horses to allow the system to recover. So this is my crew a few years ago building these structures. And this is a cool shot or image before and after, before, during, I guess, of one of the structures. This is a mid-channel PAL or post-assisted log structure, and it's meant to mimic maybe a downed tree with the butt of the root like facing upstream, and it catches debris. So the picture on the left is the day that we installed it, and then the next picture is the following year during high flow. And you can see all this material, this like sod and other branches that have racked up on the upstream side of the structure, which is kind of exactly what you want to see. It makes it more complex and look more natural, actually. And then you see how the river is interacting with the structure. And then this is a few years later, and it's interesting to see how much things have changed. The river is actually a grading. It's raised. It's coming up. It's like being uplifted, and then it's kind of forcing these meandering patterns to happen. And there's some pools that are being created, and lots of little hidey holes for fish to hide. And the channel is lengthening. And we had some students from MRU, Mount Royal University here in Calgary, do GIS analysis of this project, looking at with the data that we had collected, and it was pretty cool. Like they analyze how much additional sinuosity there is, and the channel length and pools, and it's pretty cool. We just have to add the stuff to the river and let the river do the work. It's much better than working with heavy equipment. So again, that's that structure before. And then this is just another structure that's attached to the bank, and it shows all this sediment deposition that happens behind the structure. So this is sediment that got mobilized from upstream, and then because there's this like, kind of jet around the structure, and then it eddies around and the material is deposited behind the structure. This is bank building in action. And because there's no cattle kicking up all of this sediment, it stays settled here and it creates a perfect place for more vegetation to grow, like willows and sedges and grasses and things like that. So you can see this like river processes in action here. You have erosion happening on the outside bend, the fence is even falling in, we had to move it, and deposition happening on the inside. So pretty cool, just river processes in action. And the fish are showing a response here too. So we're seeing more species diversity in our treatment area and more bull trout. And here is our crew last year, pretty excited to be seeing some bull trout in Radiant Creek. So next, maybe I'll just pause to see if there's any questions so far. Okay, I'll keep going. Okay, next we're going to move just up the road to Elk Creek. So Elk Creek is also just right along the Forestry Trunk Road in that Clearwater Valley. And similar situation, different creek, similar issues. It still has that, it's in the same sort of landscape as Radiant Creek, similar land use. And yeah, there are some beavers here nearby also. The structures that we built, we started here in 2024, and we built both of those, the PALs, the post-assisted log structures, but also beaver dam analogs. And beaver dam analogs just mimic beaver dams. And in particular, in areas where you maybe want to encourage beaver activity or you want the kind of processes that beavers cause to happen. The imagery, the diagram here just shows like how you can, for example, try and convert or alter a channelized or incised stream into something much more complex, and with wetting the whole river valley and creating a lot more diversity. So again, this is just like sticks and mud and posts and branches. Pretty simple, low-tech technique. Here's some of the beaver dam analogs and PALs during and shortly after construction. This just shows sort of the process of what it looks like building them. And in August last year, we had some crazy high rain. And so you could really see the water really interacting with the beaver dam analog. And it's okay that it's running over and running around. That's exactly what you want it to happen. We have a lot more depth here now. We have some new wood on the analog, courtesy of the local beavers. They were pretty active there in 2025. The team went back there, I think, last week, and the beavers aren't there right now, but beavers come and go, I guess. So yeah, we have some nice clean gravels just downstream, perfect for spawning. This new plunge pool. So lots of cool habitat, and just to show you how deep this is downstream of the beaver dam analog. Here's some overhead imagery that just shows some before and after, and just highlighting some of the areas where you see some of that like channel lengthening and erosion and deposition happening to create a bit more complexity. Yeah, so I showed you this earlier, and it was like, all of these cumulative effects that are happening to our native trout and to our freshwater ecosystems. But the good news is there are ways that these things can be addressed. We know what they are, and a lot of them we're doing, and some of them just need more, will and interest to be able to continue to do more of. there's a lot of work that's been done to figure out what the problems are. I think we're really in a let's just get it done kind of phase. So yeah, um, we've got this. There's lots that can be done to improve habitat. Except the natural limitations, climate change, we're just gonna have to live with that for the most part. So that's the good news. Okay, now I'm gonna flip over to work that we're doing in Edmonton. So this kind of came out of almost nowhere, this idea to do some sampling in Edmonton and some of the urban creeks. And the partners that we're working with, there's a group called Videa, and they have a group of 5 Indigenous youth that are working in Edmonton. We're going to be working with EPCOR, the U of A, and obviously ourselves. So working in an urban environment is complicated, and the streams and the creeks that in these urban areas, they, you know, have to cope, I guess, with all of this land use that happens in heavily developed urban areas. So at all these different scales, whether it's the broad sort of watershed scale, you have these issues, increase in impermeability, that changes the water budget and the timing of flow. You have it more in nutrients, fine sediment. At the smaller scale, like at the sort of valley reach, again, you're seeing greater surface runoff and less infiltration. Water can't soak into concrete and asphalt, and so it runs off really quickly. Increased frequency of severe floods, decrease in meander geometry, increase in temperatures. And then at the site scale, you see things like channel armoring or riprap and concrete and limestone rocks along the riverbanks that reduces the habitat complexity and variety. You see changes and decreases in the riffle pool complexity and changes in the substrate and decreased riparian health. All of these things are going on at all these different scales in urban environments on creeks. And here, if you look at the hydrograph, this is White Mud Creek in Edmonton. This from, I guess, 2024. I screenshot this. And you can see these big peaks. So every time there's a peak, that's a rain event. Or in the spring, maybe snowmelt. But it comes up so fast because the water is running off that concrete and asphalt landscapes really, really quickly. And then it comes down. And then the next rainstorm happens and it peaks, it goes up again and down, up and down, up and up and down. And this is just wild. This is challenging for a natural environment. In a more intact watershed, you have more spongy, soft landscapes and grass and wetlands and things that slow the flow and make it harder for water to get into the creeks. And Edmonton has suffered from like obliteration of urban creeks. It's great. We still have some urban creeks in Edmonton, but this project that was done ages ago, 25 years ago, Catherine Martel and Henry Demeyer, they did this project and looked at lost creeks and wetlands in Edmonton. So using old air photos and historical accounts, they looked at areas that are red in this map were identified as creeks and wetlands that don't exist anymore, at least on the surface. And so this was, looking at 1924 air photos compared to current recent maps and actual site visits. So, quite a change. All this impervious surfaces affect the creeks that remain. So as cities grow and sprawl, obviously they impact the environment, and particularly in urban environments. So, Grote Road is a great example of, this winding, meandering road that used to be a creek. Here you have Grote Road wandering through this beautiful valley. This is where there used to be a creek. And this is what it is now. This is where that water course enters the North Saskatchewan River. There's other examples of this in Edmonton. Um, this is McKinnon Creek, McKinnon Ravine Park, near Glenora there. Um, the, when they were doing this project, they identified um, in the Edmonton Journal, they found records of protests and community concerns about road construction in the 60s. You know, people were concerned about all of this construction and these ravines that were being developed. Um, and they ended up a lot of them just being paved over and the creeks vaulted and the wetlands drained. So yeah, McKinnon Ravine Park is another example of one that um, used to be a creek and now it's a pathway. Another one that's kind of sad that I learned about when I was looking through this a while back was McKernan Lake. And so the lake was settled by the Cree who were displaced into South Edmonton and then eventually to Enoch. But this lake was used by waterfowl and fish and wildlife. And then in the late 1800s, 1874, settlers began building homes near the lake. But after heavy rain, the lake would flood. And so the community decided to partially drain the lake. So then in the 90s, it was still super popular. There was skating, there's curling and hockey, picnicking, and there was stories even of the orchestra playing music for evening skating parties in the winter. So this was a super important, valuable community feature. And then in 1920, the city built a pump station to direct water to the sewage system to prevent flooding. I think flooding was an ongoing concern here because it probably was just a wetland that would come up and down and up and down. And then by the 30s, the lake was completely drained and 150 homes were built. And this is what it looks like now. And there used to be a lake there, and it's just kind of sad. So the groups we're working with, Videa, they have this program called Beyond the River. And these youth leaders, they're working with local schools, educating students about First Nations and Métis history and relationships with the river valley. They're working on developing, holistic Indigenous fish habitat restoration plans and sharing what they learn with youth um, for to promote or encourage youth-led urban restoration projects in other territories. So this is a great group of individuals that we started working with a little bit last year. And they invited us, they said, we really want to work with Freshwater Conservation Canada again. And so we said, it'd be we did an electrofishing demonstration on Mill Creek last year, and they were like, wow, we really enjoyed that. We'd love to do more electrofishing. So they had some funding also from a different EDF, Environmental Damages Fund grant, to help cover our costs to do some fish sampling. And then EPCOR reached out because they're also really interested. They wanted to know what kind of work we do on urban creeks. And they're really interested in hydrology of these urban creeks because of those peak flows that I showed you. That's a concern to them. And so they're looking at opportunities to set some flow targets. And so they're doing some flow modeling and they're doing monitoring. They're looking at water quality in a lot of these creeks, working with Creek Watch. They've done some cabin sampling, so that's benthic invertebrate sampling. They're sharing all this data on DataStream, which is an open source place that you can access data. And so they saw an opportunity for doing some fish sampling and fish habitat assessment. And they have a summer student and with a field assistant good to go for 2026. So we're going to work all together and do some sampling. So what we just really want to know is who lives where. And these are some of the suspects that we think we might encounter in our sampling program. We haven't determined which creeks and how many sites we're going to sample. The student, Emily, is going to help determine that. She's going to start with understanding what data already exists, and then we'll be working to set up a sampling plan. But likely going to be, White Mud Creek, Gold Bar Creek, um, Wedgwood Creek, whatever we can get at. So anyway, these are some of the fish we expect we'll see. You might be wondering, what in the world is that orange guy? That is a rosy red minnow. So rosy red minnow is a color variation of fathead minnow, which is a native species, but rosy reds have been used in aquarium and for bait. They're part of the aquarium trade. And at some point, they got out. We were first detected in Calgary in 2016, but recent evidence suggests that they've been around for a bit longer than that. And I know Shauna is on the call and is involved in some work to track rosy red minnows. Yeah, working with Justin Poon, who is working with Ambrose University and the Royal Alberta Museum. They're trying to track rosy red minnows. So they're looking for people to help upload any observations they see to iNaturalist or just by email. And you can also, if you do see these fish, there's other places that you can upload observations to EdMaps, which is an invasive species app for tracking. So that is the rosy red minnow. Another program I just want to highlight is Sucker Watch. And this was put together by my colleague Elliot, who you may know. He's a restoration biologist at Freshwater Conservation Canada. He started this project Sucker Watch as a, a school project when he was completing his degree in 2024. And the point of it was to understand or improve awareness and understanding of suckers and their spawning phenology, so the timing and where they spawn and what species. So what are suckers? Suckers are members of the Catastomidae family, and it includes all these really cool fishes. They're almost uniquely North American. So all these different suckers, mostly only found in North America, which is pretty interesting. Some of them can live for over 100 years. The bigmouth buffalo can live 100 years, which is pretty wild. And they're found across North America in a huge array of habitat types. So if they're so common, why don't we know more? Which is a really good question. And there was this paper that came out about 5 years ago talking about the sort of rough fish paradigm. And so rough fish being things like suckers that have less maybe prestige, I guess, than things like trout and salmon. And this graph shows what they found is that, how many studies there are based on the species. And so rainbow trout's way up here. That's got the most. Then Chinook salmon, largemouth bass, Atlantic salmon. And so you can see like game fishes get way more attention and research and more study than some of these other ones. Lake whitefish, white sturgeon, some of the catfish, some of these are in this other category. And then suckers, burbot, drum, bullhead, chub, are considered in this rough fish category that just don't, people just don't look at them. And suckers have been persecuted pretty big time in a lot of different jurisdictions, sometimes even by fisheries management to try and wipe them out in favor of, so wiping out native suckers even in favor of stocked non-native game fish. So yeah, not super well understood, despite the fact that they're really widespread and there's a lot of diversity. So in his project, he created an iNaturalist project, which is a citizen science platform for sharing observations of plants and fish and wildlife and all kinds of things. So there were 145 observations from 8 provinces and 27 states. And he finished the program, but this project lives on, and there's an opportunity for continued citizen science. There are some species in Alberta that are really data poor, like red horses, plain suckers, and quillback. So this data set, anyone can participate in this, but the data could, be used for research on a variety of different questions. And also a great way to improve just appreciation and awareness, which is critical in conservation and management. If nobody knows and nobody cares, unfortunately, we end up with creeks that get buried over and fish that get wink out without anybody paying attention. So I wanted to highlight just some of the observations that have been done in Edmonton. This is on White Mud Creek. So you can zoom into the map, you can click on all these little icons and see what people saw and when. And it's not too late. So some of the suckers might be done spawning by now, but I was looking at this morning, and there's a guy, White Mud Wayne, who has been doing a lot of observations, and the let me flip back. Sorry, long-nosed sucker observations typically occur in early to mid-May, and shorthead red horse observations are around now, so late May, even into early June. So what a great time to go for a walk on White Mud Creek, and maybe you could see some spawning shorthead red horse. Yeah, so why? These looking at these non-sport fish and these little creeks in Edmonton that are often, overlooked can help inform future restoration or management. There's a proposal that comes and goes and comes and goes for daylighting Mill Creek, which would be a huge opportunity. The more people talk about that and want that, the more likely it is to happen. There's, opportunity for improved stormwater management, in-stream restoration in these creeks, watershed management. The more we know, the more informed decisions can be. And then having people out and sampling these areas, whether it's through an organized effort or just, citizen science, again, helps build an awareness and appreciation for these local fishes and for these urban creeks. There's an opportunity to fill data gaps and also document invasive species like rosy red minnows, or maybe there's something else. So in terms of opportunities this summer, or for things for the Northern Lights fly fishers or others to get involved in, we're planning our creek sampling the week of July 13th. We expect to have multiple crews working in multiple different places for the week. The sites, as I mentioned, are to be determined, but there's likely some opportunity to help just with buckets and recording data, maybe processing fish and maybe fish capture. I expect these will be kind of intensive sampling efforts, but maybe there's an opportunity for folks to come out and help, and I'm happy to keep you in the loop about that. And then Sucker Watch, you can totally do that on your own. And it's, an annual spring event. And I think now it's maybe not too late to see some of those suckers still spawning. And then reporting rosy red minnows is another way that folks can contribute to these efforts and, help people out. Yeah, so I'm going to end it there. And I appreciate everyone's interest and attention, although I can't actually see the screen. Maybe everyone's nodding off, but yeah, I'm happy to take questions if folks have them.
Just for curiosity, Lesley, I caught a cutthroat about 10-15 kilometers below Rocky Mountain House. So that was kind of a surprise. Like that was last year. So they're moving down.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
It surprised the heck out of me. At first I thought, it was brown and then looked more bullish. And then by the time I got out of the water, it was a cutthroat.
You're like, what the heck?
Yeah, well, it was, what the heck, yeah. Yeah, so they are moving down a little bit, so maybe some of the stocking and stuff like that farther up is beneficial.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I'll try to catch him again this year. And he was actually pretty big, like he was 17-18 inches.
Oh, really?
So it wasn't a juvenile, like he was rode up. But thank you for all the work you guys are doing for sure. Let us know about some of the other stuff when they're starting up and stuff like that too.
Will do.
We got a question here.
What's daylighting?
Oh, daylighting. Yep, thanks for that. Daylighting is when you take a creek that has been buried or vaulted, so a creek that's in a pipe or in a stormwater, system, and bringing it back up to the surface and making it a river or creek again. And this has been done in a few different areas. I think Burnaby has been doing some of this. I think Toronto is doing it. There's a huge daylighting project that was done in Seoul, Korea years ago, Yonkers, New York. This is becoming like it's like the frontier of urban creek restoration, I think, is daylighting and making amends for those mistakes of the early part of the century where creeks were just piped and built over.
Peter?
Right. Oh, yeah, hi Leslie. Any, I kind of wondered about the involvement of the city of Edmonton. Is it interested in doing any daylighting of any of the creeks in the city? And is it providing any funding or staffing support for the work?
Um, The city of Edmonton had a proposal, like it was on their website. They were doing public information sessions. They had all these drawings and different conceptual designs for daylighting and restoring Mill Creek. And it's a hefty price tag to carry out a project like that. And I think it's just sort of on the shelf, maybe until there's interest and opportunity and funding to do something like that. I haven't heard any updates about it, but anytime someone reaches out to me looking for a potential habitat offsetting project, I always suggest that. But it's such a big project, it would probably take like um, just a lot to do. But I think there's a way. And habitat offsetting is a mechanism under the Fisheries Act. So if a person or a company has a Fisheries Act authorization that there's going to be a harmful alteration or disruption to fish and fish habitat, they have to, if they can't mitigate, oh, Sean is on. If they can't avoid that harm or mitigate it appropriately, then they have to offset. So some of our work is actually funded through this mechanism where restoration is done to offset for harms that are done elsewhere. So that's why I think Mill Creek would be a sweet place for a mega habitat offset.
Lesley, thank you very much. I, I'm ignorant of sucker behavior and where suckers fit in the ecological niche. What's their role in the environment in freshwaters?
So what's the role of suckers in the environment?
Yeah, how do they fit into the food chain and what do they do with regard to other species and so on?
Yeah, so they can provide a food source for other fish and other animals, even mammals. There's places where bears like are hang out on sucker runs to feed in the spring. That happens, probably in a lot of places that we have these sucker runs for spawning. It's like what you would see on the West Coast with salmon, but it's in Alberta that happens with suckers and bears. And so that's a pretty important food source. And then, those carcasses may also be carried off into the forest and things like that. Suckers play that, they also are food for other fish. And they also eat, they have a different way of eating. They have a different food, foraging habits and requirements than like trout or pike or things like that because of their mouth structure is on the bottom of their bodies. And so they can like, you know, eat algae and things like that off the rocks that other fishes can't do. So it helps with cycling the whole food chain and nutrients.
Secondly, I wondered, I honestly don't know what happens with water that runs off. Do all of the places around Mill Creek, for example, just drain directly off roads into the creek?
Yeah, a lot of them do. So they would go into the stormwater system. There's probably some, well, there are some like stormwater ponds that would um, provide that, like, the stormwater might run off the street into a stormwater pond and then eventually into the creek. But if you walk along Mill Creek, you'll see stormwater outfalls, which is where that runoff gets into the creek.
Yeah, and that must then be full of oils and other things that are on the asphalt.
Whatever's on the road.
Yeah. And so do we know anything about the water quality, for example, in Mill Creek?
So I think that is actually one thing that EPCOR is doing. They're working with the Creek Watch program. So Creek Watch is another citizen science volunteer program that anyone can do as an organized group and go out and sample a local creek on a regular basis. EPCOR's actually hired Creek Watch to do sampling on Mill Creek and others to have, like, scientifically robust water quality data. And yeah, so yes, the answer is yes.
Lesley, I'll leave you with a sucker story. When I was a kid, my uncle was a fanatic fisherman. We were out hunting and he come in from a different camp he was at. He come into the camp with a jar of pickled salmon. And he set it down in front of everybody, pickled salmon, everybody dug right into it. Halfway through, he says, guys, you're eating sucker. And honest to God, to a man, they stopped eating it right there. But up until then, it tasted just like salmon. So it's a human edible.
I've heard similar stories. Yeah, Jim Stelfox, who used to be a biologist down here in the, Canmore, Cochrane area, he has stories that he had some suckers from like the Kananaskis lakes that he fed to some friends or family, and he said they were none the wiser.
Yeah, like if he hadn't said a word, we would have finished it off, the whole jar, and he had it pickled, he had dye in it to change it pink, and honest to God, like I said, it was really good until then. Well, thank you very much for the talk. Oh, you got another question?
What other invasive species might you find in the Edmonton region, other than those crayfish?
Question. Shauna, I don't think there's Prussian carp in Edmonton, is there?
Yeah.
Not- Goldfish at this point. So I found goldfish, I think, in White Mud Creek back in 2015. Yeah, those were kind of not so we didn't find. I found that in 2011, and now they're popping up all over the place. And those are the ones that are used to really like that. So right now we don't have Prussian carp, but they are making their way up. But I should ask people and I've been spotted in River recently. So definitely the ramp faster like that. So
We had some audio problems. We didn't hear any of that. Oh, you broke up.
Yeah, your audio is kind of off. I heard that you said there are goldfish in White Mud Creek, and that there are Prussian carp potentially moving up towards Edmonton.
I've heard of reports of Prussian carp being seen in White Mud Creek in the city. Oh. One other question for you, Lesley. We're hearing reports about funding cuts from the province, from the federal government, and whatever. I'm not sure what's happening, but is there a dramatic impact on the work you're able to do because of the funding cuts we're hearing about?
So yeah, funding cuts. Yeah, there's definitely been some changes. The province, we've lost funding to a few provincial programs. There was the Watershed Resilience and Restoration Program. That's ending. There was the Land Stewardship Center, had a watershed stewardship grant. That's done. The Land Stewardship Center is over. They shut down. The federal government had the Nature Legacy Fund for aquatic species at risk. It's done. So yeah, there are definitely some programs that have been lost. And some of them that are still around, like EDF, and there's a habitat stewardship program for species at risk. Some of these have been around for like 30 years, and we really rely on them. They're really important funding sources. ACA is a super important funding source for us as well. We're the federal government released this nature strategy a few weeks ago, and there's lots of like funding, that they talk about in there. But a lot of it is for Pacific salmon and Atlantic salmon. And when you read through it, you just don't see anything about freshwater. So that's kind of concerning. Yeah, so we just have to like stay on our toes and, keep looking for funding opportunities. We applied for a huge grant from the Forest Resource Improvement Association a few weeks ago or a few months ago, but it's going to be highly competitive because there was a lot of funding available through that program. And that is collected by the government. That's funds collected by the government from stumpage fees from forestry. And so when the price of wood is high, a lot of money gets in that fund. And when the price of wood is low, there's not a lot of money in the fund. But after COVID, if you remember, wood prices were like, through the roof, and the fund grew a lot. And so they had this open call for funding that almost anyone could apply to. So we're waiting to see what happens with that. And then, like I mentioned, the habitat offsetting provides a funding opportunity for us as well. So, yeah.
Well, again, Lesley, thank you very much. It was greatly informative and we appreciate you giving us this. Oh, you got another guy? Oh, good. Sorry.
Especially in regards to the sucker. Now that the beaver dams are all blowing out, a lot of the creeks, there's no pools left for the trout. But there's positive indication that the suckers are moved all upstream. And there's no more trout.
In which system is this, or just like, is that like a general observation?
In the Scotland Creek.
Well, there's always been suckers and stuff.
Pardon?
There's always been suckers and stuff.
Yeah, but there's a lot more now, but yeah.
Sorry.
In the stopper.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a complicated one. The ACA is managing beaver and beaver dams in that creek. Yeah, I can't, I'm not sure I can really answer the question of like what's going on or if the suckers are, it sounds like you're saying the suckers are responding more positively to beavers than trout?
What I'm saying is the suckers are eating all the trout eggs, so they cannot be had.
Oh, well, there's probably some other things going on. It's one of those like, yeah, they may eat trout eggs, but trout eat them too. So they would often be able to stay in balance. Suckers and trout evolved together for 10,000 years. So, they often these kind of population can find like an equilibrium or a balance. It's probably an indication of other things that are going on in the watershed or in the system.
Suckers are harder to fish. They're more present. They're all over everything.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
I said the suckers are harder to fish. more aggressive, aren't they? Than the trout?
I'm not sure I would characterize them as more aggressive. Yeah, I'd be curious, yeah, I'd be curious what the data shows. I don't know if it's been a while probably since that system has been sampled, but yeah, I would be curious to see how suckers and brown trout interact in that system. I really don't know. I don't know.
Suckers don't catch whirling disease, do they?
Don't.
Okay.
There you go. Well, thank you very much, Lesley.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I was scheduled to be out in the field tomorrow. So appreciate being able to present over Zoom.
Well, thank you very much again. That's for sure. Good to talk to you again.